Nurses of Reddit, what's your worst work-related story? Had a nice older gentleman patient who was tachycardic, but all his labs were normal. He seemed like he took fairly good care of himself, was a little disheveled, but he dressed nice, and had nice shoes. We initially couldn't find anything wrong with him, but he had a peculiar odor to him that seasoned nurses would get suspicious of. I asked him if he had any infections on his body that he knew of, and he said no, but I wanted to do a thorough check, so we took off all his clothes, and he was fine, until I got down to his feet. He was wearing an old pair of socks, and as I peeled them down, literally the skin around his foot came off with the sock. I was essentially degloving his foot. It was so vile I couldn't even get down more than a couple inches. It was raw flesh under those socks. The wound odor was so strong I knew then that his feet were the source. He probably hadn't changed his socks in several months. He ended up being admitted and given lots of antibiotics and wound care. The memory of pulling down his socks will haunt me forever. 35-weeker delivered addicted to heroin and Xanax. Mom also stated she drank a fifth of tequila a day nearly every day of the pregnancy. Third baby delivered in 2 years like this. Tremors so bad from withdrawal she looked like she was having seizures. Their poop in the first few days of life is so acidic from everything in their system that it eats their bottoms. Terrible skin breakdown. Projectile vomiting. Inconsolable high-pitched neuro cry. Ugh. She's my sweet little honey and I'm gonna take her home to foster if I can. Not a nurse, but a nursing assistant. I was pulled to the ER one night to help with a patient being brought in by ambulance. We're a small hospital with only one nurse. Anyway, we knew this patient was going to be a mess after hearing from the medics that she had been on her floor for weeks. Her husband, who didn't live with her, had been bringing her food, but otherwise left her laying there. The medics had to literally scrape her off the floor with the help of a shovel. She was a rather large lady, and you can imagine the sores on her backside from laying there in her own filth for a month. We of course started cleaning her up right away, and it shocked me all the trash I pulled out of her folds. She even had a pop bottle lid in one fold that had carved a wound in her skin. Homeless guy that hadn't taken his boots off for a couple weeks because of the snow. Came in due to nausea and vomiting, but looked good. Just homeless guy weird. Start getting him changed into a gown for imaging and go to take off his boots, and what do you know? The skin came off like socks. Sick because of trench foot and gangrene. He lost some toes. My best friend is an RN and her favorite story is about a super nice lady in her late 30s who came in because of a labial abscess. Basically she got an ingrown hair from shaving, which got infected and resulted in most, if not all, I can't remember, of her labia needing to be removed. But why stop there, right? Turns out, the tissue just did not want to heal. She was in the hospital for nearly a month while they continued to farther and farther up this poor woman's abdomen until she basically had no flesh from the belly button down to her lady bits. It did finally start to heal, but holy F***K man. Edit. She reminded me that the woman's hip bones were visible at its worst. So, yeah. Elderly meth addicted prostitute admitted for sepsis yet again. Cultures are all negative until someone sees that her colostomy is a bit too red and puffy to be considered normal. We cultured it, and she had syphilis as well as a bunch of MRSA. Turns out she was letting some of her John's F***K her stoma. When we told her what we had figured out she just shrugged and said that a hole is a hole. Things I've helped remove from grown men's penis: Lego lightsaber, baby carrot, plastic spoon, small circular magnets, purple crayon, golf pencil, and I've only been in emergency medicine for 6 years. Edit. Not the same man, all different. Everyone keeps mentioning bud stuff. I once sent a man from the ER to the operating room to have 14 inches of a pool noodle removed from his ass. Yep, like a big ass pool noodle. He cut it. IDK about worst, but I'm at work right now, and a few hours ago I asked a patient for a urine sample and was punched in the throat. Thankfully it's gotten better since then. There are so many to choose from, but here are a couple, which are actually quite sad as well. A lady who lived by herself had fainted on her patio and no one found her until 3 days later. She had been lying in her own feces, and when she came into hospital we found live maggots crawling inside her vagina, and she was septic. We had a very obese and diabetic lady, 250 kilograms, who was only in her 50s, admitted with infected/necrotic wounds on her apron. Unfortunately she had left it for so long that the only option left for her was surgery. However, surgeons deemed her unsuitable for surgery. She eventually passed away, but what was so eye-opening to me was that we had to order a specific body bag for her because she couldn't fit into a normal one. It took 2 woodsmen and 5 nurses to get her into a body bag. So many to choose from. I'm gonna go with the homeless guy that came to our hospital with an abdominal abscess, basically a hole in his abdomen. We were trying to clean his wound and assess the damage, and when we reached inside his wound, we started finding money. He nonchalantly stated that he kept his money tucked in there to protect it from being stolen. Anything involving maggots, unless we put them there on purpose. Had a drive and dump that got admitted. Lady of the night, based on clothing choices. Had roaches, just 3, but any is too many, crawling out of her nether region. God love my tech, she just stomped on them and made fun of me. Got my arm stuck between a patient's butt cheeks while inserting a fecal management system for C. diff management. I weighed in at about 115 number at the time. He was 400 plus. He clenched and was screaming at me to get out of his ass. Happened years ago and still gets brought up. Had a patient who had a sacral decute that was huge. My head would have fit in the hole. No hyperbole. The dressing change was like trying to pull a deep dish extra cheese pizza off someone's caved in lower back. She had so much slough. She lived through that for months. Plus she was demented, deaf, blind, on dialysis, had ACAs to her hips, and had billet amputations to her elbows. Constantly begged Jesus to let her die. Her daughter had POA and just wouldn't change the code status. I was in nursing school and did hospital placement this past year and saw a couple things that were interesting. A teenage girl came in after she stabbed herself in the genitals with paper clips to the point they had to be surgically removed. Was probably one of the most memorable for me. The other memorable case was a pedophile that was found wandering around with advanced dementia and brought to hospital. He had to have one-on-one care all the time because he kept sexually harassing the nurses and at times thought he was in prison and would get violent. A 13-year-old boy once ejaculated on my arm in front of his grandmother. He was in the ER for a boil near the base of his penis. Went to do wound care, didn't even touch the penis itself. Barely had started and then spludge all over my F***ing arm. Edit. The worst smelling thing was a homeless man who came in with what looked like moon boots on his feet, except they were surgical boots that he placed foam around and duct tape. They hadn't been removed for about 3 months. He was also diabetic and had ulcers on his feet. We had to cut them off to be able to see what was happening. The smell permeated the entire emergency room. To top it off, maggots were just falling off his feet and wiggling on the ground. He was yelling down the hall and rude to everyone but me and would only let me take care of him. He ended up refusing care and insisted that we tape his shoes back on and let him leave. Management finally said we could and we sent him off. Saddest stories are the kids. 6-year-old shot by a drive-by and was being coded by the time she arrived. She didn't make it, and hearing the mother hear the news and screaming from down the hall will stick with me forever. Happy story, a teenager was out drinking with friends and they accidentally ran him over. We thought he had no brain activity and was going to be a donor. He was transferred from another hospital. We run some tests and he is able to squeeze fingers and respond some. He went to surgery and then ICU and was discharged a week later, and his mom found me one day before he left and I was so relieved for the family. Hospice nurse here. My assignment was a 13-hour shift with a 10-year-old patient suffering from brain cancer, one-on-one care in his home. He was unresponsive but still breathing when I arrived. Basically he was gone, but his body hadn't figured that out yet. Tiny little guy in a big hospital bed, his mom lying in the bed beside him. His dad was on his other side holding his hand. Grandparents were in the adjoining living room with the patient's 6-year-old sister. Getting through that shift took all the mental and emotional strength I had. He died a few hours after my shift ended. I will gladly deal with blood, vomit, pus, s***t, whatever rather than go through something like that ever again. Prisoner patient got mad at his cellmate. So mad that he took a razor blade to his own scrotum. He decided to turn this cut into a kangaroo pouch and tried to put a travel-sized toothbrush into the cut. To top it off, he slammed 2 pencils up his urethra. Mental health is a real thing. So I guess not worst for me as it was for him. Bonus story, car rolls up and dumps out a girl who has an axe sticking out of her head. Immediate surgery. She didn't make it and they caught the people who dumped her. But, yeah, seeing the cruelty of humanity is the worst. Wow, this has blown up. Therefore bonus story #2. Lady came in via ambulance with a seat cushion stuck to her backside. She had shat herself at home and had no one to care for her. She did this for over 2 weeks before someone called Adult Protective Services. She had to have surgery to remove the cushion from her backside because all that s***t had cemented the cushion to her skin. Absolutely terrible. Ooh, oh man. Severely addicted heroin user admitted for sepsis and respiratory failure. About 3 or 4 days into his admission we find multiple broken needles lodged in his arms while trying to place a PICC line. After a few more days he code switch was uneventful until the abscess that was brewing under his left clavicle exploded and sprayed pus everywhere. He survived that and went for an IND which left a gaping hole in his chest and neck you could fit 3 fists in. His clavicle had rotted away from osteomyelitis and he had minimal tissue left connecting his neck to his shoulder on the left side. After 30 days intubated in the ICU he finally died. All the while his drug addicted sister kept stopping by and telling us how he was a fighter and was going to make a full recovery. Yeah right lady. Respiratory not a nurse here. One of the worst that haunts me was a botched suicide. The bullet went through his lower jaw and out his eye. It wasn't just the gaping hole that bothered me, it was more of the look in his eye. So haunting. He just wanted to die and we couldn't let him. Other than that, all the pediatric and neonatal cases. The cruelty these kids face at the hands of the ones who are supposed to take care of them. Sometimes you just feel so ashamed of humanity. I'll go with a frequent flyer with unidentifiable green goop oozing out of cauliflower-like sores on her legs. The goop wasn't anything that showed up on culture and often resulted in maggots burrowing in her legs. It also smelled awful and she was really mean. She was about a 1 a month for various reasons and ended up being found dead at home. Runner up is the 516-pound lady I managed to cath with the assistance of 3 med students. Found some food decaying in one of her folds. I think it was a little Debbie. My father worked in her at the beginning of his nursing career and he said one of the hardest things he had experienced was a young man who shot himself in the face, but he was still alive. All that was left was the back of his neck / bottom part of his skull. The man died a short time later, but could you imagine seeing something like that? God bless nurses, they truly deal with so much. You've reached a checkpoint. R/I bleach take a few moments for a break. So many one very old lady was admitted from her home where her family was caring for her. I took off her shoes because I needed to do an assessment. Next I took off her sock and her entire necrotic heel fell off. Like literally fell on the floor. Thank God I had gloves on. The family said they hadn't taken off her socks in over 2 months. Poor thing died 12 hours later from sepsis. Big surprise. So much poop. Now I'm all for wanting patients to poop so they don't get constipated, but sometimes staff joke around that they hope their patients have a big BM 10 minutes after they leave their shift. People still die of preventable bowel obstructions. Sometimes when milk of magnesia, suppositories, or enemas just won't work, yeah literally have to go in after it and remove the brick or pieces of it to get it started. So fun. One mentally ill person used their gaping butt cheeks to smear poop all down a wall in the hallway. So lovely. /s I don't mind blood, but pus smell is nasty. One of the worst smells ever was a patient who had a brain shunt and also nephrostomy tubes, so when we'd empty the drainage bag it was urine and cerebral spinal fluid mixed together. That one was about 23 years ago, because I remember I was pregnant, and I was hypersensitive to smells. Luckily my coworker did me a solid, by emptying and measuring it. I took care of the person otherwise, but couldn't stand to do that 1-minute task. Good luck to your wife. She'll be able to find a job anywhere. There's a shortage of us. I have been out of work now for a few months, because of a shoulder injury. Remind her to be really careful with her back and everything. Electrocution. The smell of burnt hair and flesh is something you'll never forget when you've smelled it. He was wearing steel toe boots and that's where the electricity exited. Each toe looked like an overcooked hot dog, the split end and everything. Easily any patient that has tick. I swear it's a condition from hell itself. Basically the blood clots abnormally, and clots will form throughout the small vessels, causing hyperperfusion to all the organs. The kicker is, while blood is clotting throughout the small vessels, it's not clotting in places that are needed like the orifices, mouth, eyes, nose, genitals, around any external devices like fourths, chest tubes etc., or any open wounds. So the patient is bleeding out externally while going into multi-organ failure internally because none of their organs are getting blood flow. All the patients I've had with this condition barely lasted 48 hours. The last patient I took care of like this couldn't go more than 30 minutes without some fluid resuscitation, even with vasopressors, or his blood pressure would drop to like IS***TU not 50/30. Not a nurse, but I work as a substance abuse counselor in the addition. I had a lady who came into on an opiate overdose, survived, and then had an unrelated brain aneurysm 2 hours later. I brought her almond Hershey bars while she was in ICU, and she is currently working towards being in recovery a full year. Worst is always chronically homeless males with substance abuse disorders. Specifically meth, as the state will not detox them, and unlike opiates there is no grant-based programs available. Breaks my heart to see people wanting help kicked out at 3 in the morning. Georgia is not a recovery supporting state. Nothing related, like lost stories here. I work at palliative care. Most patients have a stay of only 30 days, but we had this lovely lady that stayed for more than 400 days in our care. Her husband came every day with flowers and some days even brought us nurses something to eat and to show appreciation for our care. Fast forward to late in this lady's stay, and the lovely husband's telling us that he will kill himself after her wife dies. The lady did die, and we tried to contact this man, with no success. We tried, and he was never found again. What'll happen to this lovely guy I guess we'll never know. Not a nurse, but a medtech. So I hide out in the lab, but the blood bank has the most interaction with the techs, nurses, and doctors and deal with emergencies fairly frequently. The worst story was a toddler brought in, just as not breathing to the air. They draw labs, get a blood type/antibody screened on to take kit for testing and surgery. The nurse picking up the blood is chatting with us while we get everything tagged up to go, and mentions shaken baby syndrome. Turns out the poor kid had several signs of previous abuse plus the signs of being shaken, blood on the brain, retinal hemorrhaging, etc. And I believe family members got into a physical altercation at the hospital and security had to break it up. More recently, a guy walked into the ER stabbed and screaming. Ironically his trauma admit name, basically a placeholder identity, until they figure out the patient's actual name/job, was trauma kuti as they had been using QA QB, etc. He just got the perfect one for his condition. Make sure to like and subscribe for more daily content. Thanks for watching.